We can talk now with Hans-Jakob Schindler. He's Senior Director of the Counter-Extremism Project and joins us today from Poland. Hans-Jakob, what does this deal mean for Hamas? Would you say it's more of a victory or a failure for them?
Well, first and foremost, it's a victory for the hostages who've been in captivity for more than a year. It is also a victory for the Palestinian civilians in Gaza who suffered under Hamas until October 2023 and then suffered horribly because of Hamas since. For Hamas, this deal really is the recognition that they have nothing more to gain by prolonging this conflict. Their building blocks of their strategy, international pressure, regional involvement of other Iranian proxies has not worked out. It has not stopped Israel from continuing to degrade significantly its military and command infrastructure in Gaza. And any months or weeks they wait longer now is only going to make them even weaker.
After 16 months of battling the overwhelming might of Israeli forces, what is left of Hamas?
In the Gaza Strip, very, very little. No really command and control structure. The tunnel network is severely degraded. But outside Gaza and outside the Palestinian territories, the Hamas infrastructure is pretty much untouched. Haniyeh was killed in Tehran. The former leader of Hamas was killed in Tehran. But the money of Hamas is still there. Most of the leadership of Hamas outside the Palestinian territories is still there. So it can, over time, of course, rebuild. And it will get some credit, of course, for getting Palestinian prisoners back. So on the propaganda front, Hamas is not in a bad position to rebuild. But it will take a very, very long time and is only possible if the money remains untouched or if there is no real management decision of what's supposed to be happening with Gaza that doesn't include Hamas.
At the start of the war, many said that it's impossible to destroy Hamas because no matter how many Hamas militants are killed, their ideology will continue to live on. Do you agree with that assessment now?
Absolutely. I mean, that was my assessment from the very start. And that's what we see. Hamas as an organization, as an ideology, still exists. It's negotiating as we speak with the Israeli government. So it is not gone. What is gone is its power infrastructure in the Gaza Strip. It has the ability to rebuild this if the circumstances allow it to do so. So it was never possible to defeat Hamas as an idea, as an ideology, or as a regional group, because most significantly, money and leadership are to a large part outside the Palestinian territory. So attacking Gaza was meant to break its power in the Strip, which is at the moment broken, but not broken beyond repair.
Assuming that this ceasefire is fully implemented, what is likely to become of Gaza? It's in ruins.
Absolutely. I mean, it is a very big assumption that this deal is going to be fully implemented because it has three phases. I'm pretty optimistic about phase one because it's a very operationally spelled out procedure within the deal that both sides agreed to: hostages for prisoners, withdrawal, as well as increase of humanitarian aid. But phase two, complete Israeli withdrawal, is going to be a massive political problem for the Netanyahu government. Phase three is an even harder problem because it's about the future of the Gaza Strip. Who is controlling the Gaza Strip? Not the Israelis, but who then else? If it's not some international force, some Arab groups, it will be very likely, again, Hamas. So I would say the assumption that it's fully implemented is still a very, very, very big assumption to make at this particular point in day. Now, what needs to happen immediately is that, of course, there needs to be, once the ceasefire is coming into force and the exchanges start, a significant increase in humanitarian aid flowing into Gaza, and then the stabilization and then eventually repair basic infrastructure, electricity, water, roads, and then the medical system, to even be able to make sure that people just don't die of hypothermia or hunger or diseases in the Gaza Strip. So there's a lot of work ahead. Even in phase one, that work should already begin.
So in addressing the humanitarian needs in Gaza, which are profound, there's a tremendous amount of work to be done by whoever ends up being in control. For the post-war Gaza phase, if we ever get there, there's been talk of having maybe the Palestinian Authority in control. There's also been talk of having Egypt and Qatar play a role there. What do you think is the most likely scenario?
Well, one thing is clear. There is not going to be a political order or a power center in Gaza that is not Hamas unless there is outside help for the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinians in Gaza. They need power. They have no means to make sure that Hamas doesn't come back. At the moment, there are two groups in the Gaza Strip that hold weapons and therefore all the means of violence. One is the Israeli army, and one is whatever is left of Hamas and the Palestinian Jihad. There needs to be an outside force. The talk is about Arab states. I'm not sure the Egyptian government is very keen to do this, but there needs to be some kind of outside policing force in Gaza to prevent Hamas from coming back.
Gaza is a Palestinian territory. Palestinians presumably should be in control of that. The Palestinian Authority is really, for many, the only legitimate Palestinian government that's operating in the Palestinian territories now. Could it be reformed and given control of Gaza and to allow a new political process to elect a new leadership, perhaps?
It is very clear that the Palestinian National Authority needs a lot of reform. It hasn't held an election in more than a decade. It is really also politically weakened, but it's also clear that if the Palestinian National Authorities would be given full control of Gaza now, the same thing that would happen that happened in 2007, were all of the parts of the Palestinian National Authorities that were not Hamas were thrown out of the Gaza Strip. So for the immediate moment and for quite a while until the PNA has been reformed, and it has to be possible to reform the PNA because that's the only Palestinian political non-terrorist representation that the Palestinian people have. When they get that help from whoever provides that help, the UN or international forces from the Middle East, they have a chance to take control again, reform, and then restart negotiations with Israel. But this is even longer off than the implementation of this immediate hostage deal.
Hans-Jakob Schindler from the Counter-Terrorism Project. Thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thank you so much.
Let's take a closer look now at exactly what's been agreed. The ceasefire and hostage deal is supposed to be completed in 3 phases. Phase 1 is a 6-week-long ceasefire set to start on Sunday. During this phase, Israeli troops would withdraw from populated areas of Gaza, and Hamas would release 33 hostages. In return, Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. Phase 2 would see Hamas free more hostages and a full Israeli withdrawal from all of Gaza. Then, what is likely to be the most difficult part would see the start of negotiations to reach a permanent end to the war. Finally, in a 3rd phase, major reconstruction efforts would start in Gaza. Displaced Palestinians would be able to return to their homes anywhere in the territory, and Hamas would release the remains of any remaining hostages who have died. Earlier, I spoke about this with our Jerusalem correspondent, Gordine. I asked her about the challenges associated with getting the agreement ratified and implemented.
Well, in fact, this morning we heard from the Israeli Prime Minister's office that Hamas now wants to decide itself who the identities of the Palestinians who will be released from Israeli prisons as part of this deal. This is something, according to the Prime Minister's office, that is against what has been agreed. So we're already seeing quite a bumpy start to this deal. But there are, of course, other challenges. Now, 98 hostages remain in Gaza. It's not clear how many of them are still alive. And what we have to remember is that not all of these hostages were actually captured by Hamas, so it's unclear whether Hamas is actually able to bring them all back bring all of them back, so that could provide some hiccups on their end. Now, Israel also will want security guarantees in the next phases of this deal, something that Hamas will be reluctant to agree on because it will likely come with certain relinquishments of its territory along the border. And then politically, you also have to see, Hamas is said to have been somewhat divided when it comes to, or there have been some differences when it comes to its leadership inside and outside of Gaza. Leaders of Hamas outside of Gaza have reportedly been somewhat more flexible in the talks compared to the leaders inside Gaza, which have been led by Mohammed Sinwar, the younger brother of Yahya Sinwar, the architect of the October 7 terror attacks of last year. And then in Israel too, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has to get his government on board, his cabinet on board. And we know that some of his more radical ministers have been opposed to a deal, and together they do actually have the potential of bringing this government down. So significant bumps ahead of us, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has also said himself that the war itself isn't over.
There's been work on this deal for months and months and months. What actually pushed it over the line to get it done? Of course, we're still waiting for that ratification, but it seems like a deal is in place.
That's very true. And this deal, one also has to say, is not very different to the deal that was put forward 8 months ago by the Biden administration. But what seems to be the deciding factor now is the incoming US President Donald Trump, who has been putting significant pressure not only on Hamas, we've seen his statements over the past few weeks, and we are now seeing significant pressure also on the Israeli side. In these negotiations, the outgoing Biden administration, but also the incoming Trump administration have been working quite closely together on getting this deal done, with the Trump administration putting significant pressure on the Israeli side, and that certainly now seems as if it has been fruitful.
Emily, thank you very much. DW's Emily Gordine there in Jerusalem. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres welcomed the ceasefire deal as a critical first step, but stressed that much hard work lies ahead.
The humanitarian situation is at catastrophic levels, and I call on all parties to facilitate the rapid, unhindered and safe humanitarian relief for all civilians in need. From our side, we will do whatever is humanly possible, aware of the serious challenges and constraints that we face. But we expect our efforts to be matched by other humanitarian actors, the private sector, and bilateral initiatives.
So why is all this happening now, just as Joe Biden leaves office as U.S. president? I asked Mike Cowburn, a political analyst focusing on U.S. politics.
Absolutely. So as Emily just said, the incoming Trump administration definitely served as a motivation for lots of the different actors here. Really, this was an interesting development from a U.S. domestic policy perspective, because this really was the two administrations working hand in hand. The advisors were really collaborating and kind of playing like a good cop, bad cop role here. As Emily just said, this deal is pretty much unchanged from the deal that's been on the table for several months since last April from the Biden administration, with the Trump administration then serving to kind of push actors on both sides with kind of harsher potential future options for them. It's also important to note that the situation on the ground has changed. Obviously, the ceasefire in Lebanon that was negotiated by the Biden administration and the killing of many senior Hamas leaders has weakened Hamas's position as well. So there's a combination of different factors that have led us to this. But the incoming Trump administration certainly can't be ignored. And we've even seen Democratic members of Congress acknowledging this on social media in the last kind of 12 hours or so, and saying that, yes, Trump was an important factor in getting this ceasefire through.
Well, talk to us some more, Mike, about the Trump administration and how it's approaching all this. Do you get the impression that Trump's team is committed to ensuring this deal is implemented, because there's still a lot of work to be done?
Absolutely, and there's as Emily just mentioned as well, there's a huge amount of things that need to be done in terms of verification of compliance. Of course, right now there is no ceasefire. The ceasefire begins on Sunday, and since this deal was announced, overnight Israel killed around 30 Palestinians in Gaza. So right now there is no ceasefire. The Israeli cabinet will meet at 10 a.m. Berlin time. And of course, again, as Emily previously said, there are hardliners both in the Israeli cabinet, but also within Hamas who will likely oppose this deal. So both the Biden administration right now have work on their hands to do this, to get this through. In terms of the Trump administration, in terms of implementing this, I think that there'll be a clear, firm stance to the key actors, namely the Israeli government and the Hamas as an organization. But where the Trump administration might struggle without this partnership that they've had with the Biden administration has been very good at leveraging regional allies. Of course, this deal was struck in Qatar. And the Egyptians have also been very important in this. Now, of course, historically, Trump has paid less attention to international alliances, different organizations and groups that they can work with internationally. So once the Biden administration, of course, leaves office, maybe there's a potential that some of those aspects become stickier. And of course, those aspects are going to be really important when we get to the position of actually implementing, monitoring whether hostages have been returned. These types of things are going to need an ongoing attention.
Mike, thank you very much. That was political analyst Mike Cowburn.